Remove it. Now." The words pierced through the crowded room, sharp and commanding, leaving an unsettling silence in their wake. The voice belonged to none other than Mark Jensen, a liberal TV host infamous for his confrontational style and unapologetic boldness. His gaze was fixed, unwavering, as if daring anyone to challenge him. But his target wasn't just anyone. It was Karoline Leavitt, a young, fearless leader standing at the center of the storm. The camera zoomed in, capturing the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Reporters froze mid-scribble, and the chatter that usually buzzed in such press conferences fell into dead silence. Mark Jensen wasn't making a casual remark. This was an order delivered with the arrogance of someone used to controlling the narrative. But this wasn't about a simple necklace. No, this was something much deeper. That small, gleaming pendant resting against Karoline's chest was more than just an accessory. It was a symbol of her faith, her convictions, and the courage she carried into every room she entered. Mark Jensen wanted to strip her of that symbol, to expose her, to humiliate her in front of flashing cameras and a national audience. But what happened next? It wasn't Mark who seized control of the moment. It was Karoline. Her response didn't just silence the room. It shook the very foundation of what was supposed to be an easy takedown, and no one, not even Mark Jensen himself, was prepared for what she said next. The room was a battlefield disguised as a press conference. Journalists packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras poised like weapons, their red recording lights blinking ominously. The tension was palpable, hanging thick in the air, as if everyone sensed something explosive was about to happen. At the center of it all stood Karoline Leavitt, calm, composed, her posture unwavering despite the verbal grenade Mark Jensen had just lobbed her way. His reputation preceded him, a master of ambush interviews, a provocateur who thrived on cornering his guests and dismantling them piece by piece. But this time his target wasn't just a politician. It was a woman whose beliefs were etched into her very identity. Mark Jensen leaned forward from his podium, his voice dripping with condescension as he doubled down. "I said, remove it, now." His finger pointed sharply at the delicate necklace resting against Karoline's chest, a simple cross gleaming under the harsh glare of the lights. His demand wasn't about jewelry. It was an attempt to strip her of the very symbol that anchored her values. A hush fell over the room. Even those who often sided with Jensen shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the weight of what was unfolding. The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression on Karoline's face, every twitch of tension in Jensen's jaw. Karoline didn't flinch. She met his glare with steady eyes, her expression a mixture of quiet defiance and grace. The silence stretched, unbearable to some, electric to others. This wasn't just a clash of political ideologies. It was a collision between arrogance and conviction. And then she spoke, not with the raised voice of someone on the defensive, but with the calm authority of someone who knew exactly who she was. "You want me to remove it?" she said softly, her voice carrying through the silent room like a ripple across still water. "Or do you want me to remove what it represents?" The words landed harder than any shout could have. The room, filled with journalists accustomed to drama, suddenly felt like a cathedral, silent, reflective, waiting for what would come next. To understand the weight of Karoline's words in that tense, crowded room, you have to know who she is, not just the politician standing behind the podium, but the woman shaped by years of unwavering conviction and quiet resilience. Karoline Leavitt wasn't born into power, privilege, or prestige. She didn't grow up in the shadow of political dynasties or gilded opportunities. Instead, her roots trace back to a modest New Hampshire town, where values like faith, family, and hard work weren't just talked about, they were lived. Her parents weren't political strategists or media moguls. They were ordinary people with extraordinary principles, teaching her that strength doesn't come from status, but from standing firm when it matters most. From a young age, Karoline was different. While her peers shied away from controversy, she leaned into it, not for the sake of argument, but because she believed in something deeper. In high school, she was the student who challenged popular opinions in debate class, not for applause, but because she refused to let fear drown out her voice. She understood early on that standing up for what you believe often means standing alone. But she also learned that conviction, when rooted in truth, has a gravity of its own. It pulls people in, even those who disagree with you. College didn't soften her edges. If anything, it sharpened them. Surrounded by an environment where her beliefs were often the minority, Karoline didn't falter. She faced criticism, not with defensiveness but with thoughtful dialogue. Every heated debate, every dismissive comment only strengthened her resolve. She didn't seek to be liked, she sought to be heard. But her courage wasn't forged solely in academic debates or political circles. It was built in quieter moments. The late nights grappling with doubt, the mornings spent in prayer, the countless times she chose integrity over convenience. Her faith wasn't a talking point, it was her foundation. It shaped how she viewed the world, not as a battlefield to conquer, but as a place where truth, kindness, and resilience could coexist. So when Mark Jensen tried to strip her of more than just a necklace, he underestimated the woman standing before him. Karoline wasn't just wearing a symbol of faith around her neck. She carried it in every word she spoke, every stand she took, and every room she entered. This wasn't the first time she'd faced opposition, but it was, perhaps, the clearest example of what made her different. While others crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny, Karoline Leavitt stood tall, not because she had to, but because she was born to. The room was thick with tension, the kind that made every breath feel heavier, every second stretch longer. All eyes were fixed on Karoline Leavitt, standing firm under the harsh glare of cameras, the echo of Mark Jensen's demand still hanging in the air. But Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't shift nervously, didn't glance around the room seeking support. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate breath, her fingers gently brushing the small cross that hung around her neck. A simple piece of jewelry to some, but to her it was a symbol of something far greater. Her gaze locked onto Jensen's, steady and unyielding, not with defiance fueled by anger, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she stood for. The corners of her mouth lifted ever so slightly into a faint, disarming smile, a smile not of mockery, but of clarity. "You want me to remove it?" she began, her voice calm, yet carrying an undeniable weight. The room, filled with people used to political grandstanding and rehearsed statements, was suddenly silent, as if the very walls leaned in to hear her next words. "Or do you want me to remove what it represents?" The question hit harder than any argument could have. It wasn't defensive, wasn't combative. It was reflective, forcing not just Mark Jensen, but everyone in that room to confront their own discomfort. She wasn't just responding to an attack, she was exposing the fragility of the very idea that faith could be stripped away as easily as a necklace. She let the silence linger for a heartbeat longer before continuing, her fingers still resting lightly on the pendant. "This isn't just an accessory, it's a reminder of the strength I've found in moments of doubt, the courage I've drawn in times of fear, and the grace I've leaned on when the world felt unkind." Her voice never wavered, never rose in volume, but with each word the power in the room shifted. The cameras captured not just an image, but a moment, a woman standing unapologetically in her truth, refusing to be diminished. Karoline's eyes swept the room, meeting the gazes of those who had been quick to judge, quick to assume. "You see, my faith isn't something I put on in the morning like a piece of clothing. It's woven into who I am. It guides my decisions, shapes my values, and reminds me that my worth isn't defined by the approval of a crowd." Mark Jensen, who had started this exchange with the swagger of someone used to controlling the narrative, stood silent. His usual quick retorts and sharp comebacks caught somewhere between his pride and the undeniable truth of Karoline's words. But she wasn't finished. "I don't wear this to impose my beliefs on anyone," she continued softly. "I wear it to remind myself to be better, to be kind when it's easier to be cruel, to stand firm when it's easier to sit down, and to speak the truth when silence would be more comfortable." The words weren't just for Jensen anymore. They were for everyone who had ever felt pressured to hide who they were, to apologize for what they believed. She wasn't just defending herself. She was giving a voice to countless others. And as she lowered her hand from the necklace, letting it rest once again against her heart, the message was clear. Her faith wasn't up for negotiation. In that moment, Karoline Leavitt didn't just win an argument, she redefined the conversation. She showed that true power doesn't come from shouting the loudest or holding the microphone. It comes from standing firm in your beliefs, even when the world demands that you sit down. Karoline Leavitt's unwavering strength in that tense moment didn't materialize overnight. It was the result of a lifetime shaped by resilience, faith, and a deep-rooted understanding of who she was. To grasp the true weight of her defiant response, you have to journey back to where it all began. Karoline was born and raised in a small New Hampshire town, far removed from the flashing cameras and heated political debates that would one day define her career. Life there was simple but not easy. Her family wasn't wealthy, and there were no silver spoons or political connections to pave her way. What she did have, however, was something far more valuable, a foundation built on faith, hard work, and unshakable principles. Her parents, humble yet fiercely dedicated, taught her lessons that no classroom ever could. Her father, a man of few words but deep convictions, often said, "Your character is who you are when no one's watching." He worked long, grueling hours, yet never complained, instilling in Karoline the belief that true strength isn't loud, it's consistent. Her mother, the heart of the family, balanced tenderness with tenacity, teaching Karoline that kindness isn't weakness and that faith isn't just something you profess, it's something you live. As a child, Karoline was naturally curious, always asking questions that made adults pause. She had a boldness that set her apart, not in a rebellious way, but in a way that refused to accept easy answers. While other kids were content to go with the flow, she wanted to understand why the flow existed in the first place. Her first taste of public speaking came in middle school during a debate competition. While others were nervous, Karoline stood confidently, her voice steady, her arguments sharp. She didn't win that debate, but she discovered something more valuable, the realization that her voice mattered, and she vowed never to let it be silenced. High school presented new challenges. Karoline often found herself in the minority when it came to her beliefs. In classrooms filled with opposing viewpoints, she stood her ground, not with hostility but with grace and conviction. She joined the debate team, not because she loved to argue, but because she loved the truth. Every time she was challenged, every time someone tried to dismiss her, it only fueled her determination. College was no different. Attending a university where her values were often met with skepticism, Karoline learned that resilience isn't just about standing up when it's easy. It's about standing up when it's hard, when you're outnumbered, and when staying silent would be the safer choice. She faced professors who dismissed her viewpoints, classmates who rolled their eyes when she spoke, and social circles that questioned her beliefs. But instead of shrinking, she grew. Instead of backing down, she leaned in. Through it all, her faith remained her anchor. It wasn't just a Sunday ritual. It was the lens through which she viewed the world. Prayer wasn't her last resort. It was her first line of defense. In moments of doubt, she turned to Scripture. In moments of fear, she found courage in her relationship with God. And in moments of loneliness, she remembered her mother's words. "You're never truly alone when you know who you are." By the time Karoline stepped into the public arena, she wasn't just another young politician with talking points. She was a woman forged in the fires of adversity, someone who had faced criticism, doubt, and exclusion, and came out stronger every time. Her resilience wasn't performative. It was authentic. It was in her DNA. So when Mark Jensen tried to reduce her faith to a mere piece of jewelry, he underestimated the woman standing before him. That necklace wasn't just metal and chain. It was a symbol of every battle she'd fought, every moment she refused to back down, and every lesson she'd learned about standing tall when the world tries to knock you down. Karoline didn't just wear resilience around her neck, she carried it in her heart. For a few heartbeats, the room remained suspended in an almost unnatural silence, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts, shifting perspectives, and the quiet realization that something significant had just happened. Mark Jensen, the man who had walked into that press conference armed with arrogance and an agenda, suddenly found himself unarmed, exposed not by a louder voice, but by a quieter, stronger one. Karoline's words lingered in the air, their echoes louder than Jensen's command had ever been. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't retaliated with insults or condescension, and that's precisely what made her response so powerful. In a world where shouting often drowns out substance, she had spoken softly, and yet she had been heard more clearly than anyone expected. The shift was subtle at first. A few journalists lowered their pens, no longer scribbling notes but simply watching. Their curiosity transformed into something deeper: respect. Some glanced at Jensen, waiting for his signature snarky comeback, but it didn't come. His usual sharpness seemed dulled, his confidence cracked by the unexpected strength of Karoline's calm. Jensen opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words followed. He hesitated, a rare and telling moment for a man known for his quick, cutting remarks. His eyes flickered, not with the smug superiority he usually wore, but with something far more unfamiliar: uncertainty. The cameras caught it all, broadcasting not just Karoline's grace under fire, but Jensen's unraveling in real time. And Karoline, she stood there, unwavering, her presence filling the room in a way no spotlight ever could. Her simple cross rested against her heart, a quiet reminder that her strength didn't come from public approval or media validation. It came from within. The energy in the room shifted like a tide turning. Those who had initially dismissed her, expecting another young politician stumbling under pressure, now leaned in, captivated. Even the skeptics, the ones who'd come ready to critique, couldn't deny the authenticity of what they'd just witnessed. It was no longer about politics. It wasn't about left versus right. It was about truth standing firm against intimidation. Some in the audience began nodding subtly, their body language betraying a change in perspective. A journalist in the back, previously indifferent, lowered his camera slightly, his face softening from skepticism to genuine admiration. The tension that had filled the space moments ago had transformed, not into comfort but into reflection. Karoline had done what few could. She had turned an attack into a teachable moment, not by overpowering her opponent, but by standing so firmly in her own truth that there was no room left for his narrative. She didn't just defend herself, she dismantled the premise of the attack without even raising her voice. And Mark Jensen? For once he was just part of the background, a man overshadowed not by volume but by virtue. The cameras kept rolling, but the real story had already been written in the expressions across the room. Karoline Leavitt hadn't just held her ground. She had changed it. The tension had shifted. The balance of power quietly but undeniably transferred. Where Mark Jensen once stood with the confidence of someone used to controlling the narrative, he now found himself reduced to a mere spectator of a moment far greater than anything he had intended to create. But Karoline Leavitt wasn't finished, not yet. She let the silence linger, understanding that sometimes the most powerful words are the ones allowed to echo. Then, with a calmness that seemed almost surreal in the charged atmosphere, she took a step forward, not toward Jensen but toward everyone in the room. "Unity," she began, her voice steady and resonant, "isn't about making everyone the same. It's about respecting the differences that make us who we are." The simplicity of her words carried a weight that no shouting match ever could. It wasn't a rehearsed line, crafted for applause. It was genuine, born from a place of deep conviction, and it landed with the force of undeniable truth. The room, still wrapped in that thick silence, seemed to lean in collectively, drawn not by spectacle, but by substance. She gently touched the small cross resting against her chest, her fingers light but purposeful. "This necklace may symbolize my faith in God," she continued, her eyes scanning the room, meeting gaze after gaze without hesitation. "But what unites us as people is so much bigger than any symbol. It's found in how we treat each other, how we listen, how we build bridges rather than burn them." You could feel the shift, not just in the room but in the hearts of those present. Journalists who had come looking for a soundbite found themselves witnessing something far more profound. Even those who disagreed with her politics couldn't deny the authenticity of her message. It was no longer about left or right, conservative or liberal. It was about humanity, about the courage to stand firm in who you are while still extending respect to those who see the world differently. Karoline paused again, not because she was searching for words, but because she understood the power of letting them settle. Then she delivered the line that would define not just the moment, but perhaps her entire career. "If you disagree with me, I welcome the discussion, but I won't hide who I am, and I wouldn't ask you to either." The words hit like a quiet revolution. They weren't aggressive, but they carried the force of an undeniable truth. She had stood in the face of public scrutiny, of targeted humiliation, and emerged not just unscathed but victorious, not because she fought harder but because she stood taller. The room erupted into applause, spontaneous and genuine. It wasn't the polite, obligatory kind often heard at political events. It was real, raw and heartfelt. Some stood, others remained seated, stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Even Mark Jensen, visibly shaken and stripped of his usual smug composure, managed a small, reluctant nod. Not of agreement, perhaps, but of respect, because deep down, even he knew he had been bested, not by rhetoric, but by authenticity. Karoline didn't smile in triumph. She didn't bask in the applause. She simply stood there, steady and serene, the very embodiment of grace under fire. And as the cameras captured her in that moment, the story they told wasn't one of controversy, but of conviction. A confrontation meant to tear her down had become a testament to something far greater. She didn't just defend her faith, she elevated it, showing the world that true strength isn't in how loudly you speak, but in how deeply you believe. And that necklace? It stayed right where it belonged, resting over her heart, a symbol not just of faith, but of resilience, courage, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. When the cameras finally stopped rolling and the room began to empty, the echoes of Karoline Leavitt's words still lingered, etched into the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the moment. What began as an attempt to embarrass her, to reduce her identity to a symbol that could be stripped away, had transformed into a powerful lesson about resilience, authenticity, and the unshakable strength of faith. Karoline didn't just survive that confrontation. She transcended it. She didn't rely on anger, defensiveness, or political rhetoric. Instead, she leaned on something far more profound, her unwavering belief in who she was and what she stood for. In the face of hostility, she chose grace. In the face of mockery, she chose kindness. And in the face of pressure to conform, she chose authenticity. Her message wasn't just for Mark Jensen or the journalists in that room. It was for anyone who has ever felt the weight of being different, of standing alone in their convictions. She showed the world that true strength isn't about winning arguments or silencing opponents. It's about standing firm when it would be easier to sit down, speaking the truth when it would be safer to stay silent, and holding on to your values even when the world tries to tear them away. The applause that followed her final words wasn't just for her courage in that moment, it was for everything she represented. It was for the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are, the resilience born from facing adversity with dignity, and the grace that shines brightest when the spotlight is harshest. Mark Jensen may have walked into that room expecting to expose Karoline Leavitt, but in the end, it was his own intentions that were laid bare. And while his voice faded into the background, Karoline's words continued to resonate, carried far beyond the walls of that press conference, inspiring countless others to stand tall in their own truths. She didn't need to remove her necklace to prove a point, because the real symbol of her strength was never around her neck. It was within her all along.